I had a few questions about the disc brakes on the rear of my Tundra in the old videos. The Tundras normally come with drum brakes in the rear, and I have discs, and people were asking if I did a disc brake swap. I did, well, sorta. I did a complete axle swap, and the axle came with disc brakes. So this is an axle out of a 2014 full-size Tundra. It has the single piston caliper disc brake rears that all the second generation Tundras and Sequoias have. You can see here it's 5 lug, unlike the regular first gen Tundras, which are 6 lug. And I thought I would just kind of give you a quick overview of what it takes to get this axle under these trucks and why I did it. So starting at the pinion, you can see here that the pinion flange is way larger than the yoke here from the factory yoke from the first generation Tundra. These are the factory holes for the second generation Tundra drive shaft. You can see it's quite a bit larger, but the keyed circle on the yoke fits perfectly into the flange. So you can just slide this in place. What I did is I slid it in place, and then I used the bolt holes on the yoke as a template to drill new holes in the flange here. And then if you drill new holes, you bolt up using this factory hardware. It bolts right up, and it's worked perfectly so far. No problems with that. So that's relatively easy when it comes to axle swaps, just basically drilling 4 holes and bolting it up. You can see here that the pumpkin is significantly larger. I mean, I don't know if you can pick that up on camera, but it's much larger than a 8.4. This is a 10.5 inch ring gear in here. It also has I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly, but I believe it's like 1 3/4 thick axle shafts, 36 spline, as opposed to the 8.4, which is much smaller. This is probably twice the strength of the factory rear axle. For the leaf spring perches, you're going to have to cut the factory perches off this axle. Obviously they're going to be not in the correct place for fitting underneath the Tundra. This axle is about, well, according to the internet, it's only 1 inch wider than the factory first generation Tundra axle, the factory 8.4, but it's definitely way wider than that. I'm guessing it's more like 5 or 6 inches wider. So what I chose to do for the leaf spring mounting plates is I wanted to get rid of the U-bolts, so you didn't have to replace the U-bolts after you take them on and off every time. I wanted something with more high clearance, so I got this U-bolt elimination kit from Barnes 4-wheel drive. This is basically a platform. I believe this is made for a Ford 9-inch axle. I can't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure it's made for a Ford 9-inch or a 3.5-inch axle tube, which I think is what this one is. I had to modify it slightly to get it on here, but basically you cut off the old leaf spring perches off the old axle. You find where you're gonna put these guys on, and you just line them up. And this uses 4 large bolts here, individual bolts, and a sandwich plate on top, and that's what holds the leaf spring in place as opposed to using U-bolts. Also, a neat feature of this is it has 3 mounting positions. There's 3 holes in not only the top plate here, but also the bottom plate, so you can pick where you want the leaf spring to sit on the perch. Since this pinion on the 10.5 is about 1 inch or so longer than the 8.4 inch pinion, I chose to move the axle back 1 inch. So I mounted it in the forward position, which pushed the axle backwards. That was about it for the leaf spring repositioning. It was fairly easy. For the shocks, it was again a matter of cutting off the old shock brackets, and you could probably use the old shock brackets on the new axle and just use the factory shock positions. But what I did is I did a shock relocation kit from Archive Garage, which includes this bolt-in cross member up here that bolts in between the frame rails. It comes with these weld-on lower shock mounts. So while I was having the shocks having to cut the shocks off anyway, I went ahead and welded on these new lower shock mounts. I made them so that they're almost parallel to the ground, and I clocked them up as high as I could so they would have good clearance. And then the shocks, because the factory ones would no longer fit, I just took compressed and extended measurements and found these shocks. This is you can see the shock member there. These are just 5100s. For the brake lines, the 10.5 comes with dual drop lines from the frame. So what I did is I just took this T bracket off the old axle and just bolted it onto the bracket that was already there in place of the double lines that came with this axle. That was really all I had to do for brakes. Stainless steel brake line I replaced the factory line with. You don't have to do that, but because I have more travel, I went ahead and swapped that out. The brake lines themselves are the actual lines from this 10.5 axle. The 8.4 inch lines are too short to reach the calipers. For the breather line, it uses the same size piece that the 8.4 uses. So the breather line that I had, this is an ARB breather line, but the factory breather line will also bolt right into the 10.5, so you don't have to do anything there to swap it out. You can see here that from the leaf spring position that the axle is significantly wider. You can see how inboard the leaf springs are on the actual axle. Normally everything's in much tighter. That's why I said this axle is definitely wider, but the strength difference is immense. When I had the third member out of this thing, I laid it down next to the 8.4, and it's a monster. I'm not really worried about ever breaking this with the motor and the lightness of this truck. So it's quite a significant upgrade. Now the things you do have to deal with other than the moving around of brackets that I already mentioned is, like I said, this is a 5-lug, so you will have to get either different wheels, or you can choose to run a 5 to 6 lug adapter in the rear to match your factory 6-lug wheels. The reason I did not want to do that is because this axle is so wide as it is that running an adapter, the smallest adapter you can get is 1.5 inches, would make this even more wide. And since it's already about 6 inches wider than the factory, I had to widen the front out. And what I chose to do was to use an adapter in the front, a 6-lug to 5-lug adapter. It was a 3-inch adapter, so it brought the wheels way out. So what I did to compensate for that was I got a set of factory Rock Warrior wheels from the 2nd generation Tundra. These are a 5-lug. I've refinished them to black, but they have a very, very high offset. I think the offset is 50, if I'm not mistaken. So they pull the wheels back under the truck pretty significantly. You can see it doesn't stick out very far compared to a normal aftermarket 6-lug wheel. It barely sticks out at all. It's really not that big a deal to do the swap as far as rear axle swaps go. It's a lot of plug and play. The only thing is you do have to do some cutting and welding, and you do have to have your basic cutting and welding skills and know how to center the axle and set the pinion angle and things like that. But other than that, it's a fairly easy swap. And to me, I had already busted 2 8.4 inch center sections, so instead of continuing to break those, I just went ahead and swapped this axle in. I got it probably 10 years ago or more, back when no one was building these axles. It was a wrecked truck, and the guy gave me the whole axle and everything for like $100. And I happened to be running 430 gears at the time, and these axles come with either 410 or 430. So if you want to get lucky and get a 430, that gives you a nice gear ratio compared to factory. One little issue with these disc brakes, because the piston is larger in these than the drum brake piston is, it takes a little bit more fluid. So you will notice that your brake pedal has a little bit more down travel before you feel your brakes kind of kick in. You can address that by getting a larger master cylinder and a larger brake booster from, you can use a FJ80, T100, there's a GM adapter. There's quite a few options for that. And I may do that in the future, but even with those disc brakes as well as the GX brakes in the front, I haven't noticed it to be enough of an issue where I want to swap that out. If the booster or master cylinder goes bad, I will probably end up swapping that out in the future. That's how I got my rear disc brakes. So that's basically it for the swap. I hope I explained things well without talking too fast. I'm on my lunch break, so I just wanted to make a little quick video of how I got a second generation Tundra axle in my first generation Tundra. All right, thanks.